The Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute presents Remembering Lincoln Alexander. A conversation with Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard and Senator Don Oliver. In 2015, January 21st was declared Lincoln Alexander Day across Canada. Lincoln Alexander was an airman in the Royal Canadian Armed Forces, a member of the Queen's Privy Council, the first Black Canadian appointed Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the first Black Member of Parliament, a lawyer, the first Black Cabinet Minister, Chancellor of the University of Guelph for an unprecedented 5 terms, Chair of the Canadian Race Relation Foundation. Lincoln Alexander was an advocate, a mentor, a social justice leader, and a trailblazer.
My name is Sylvia Paris Drummond. I'm the CEO at the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this very special virtual event. We are located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq peoples. Lincoln Macaulay Alexander was a soldier, a lawyer, a politician, a social activist, and a pioneer who paved the way for generations to come. For Senator Don Oliver, Lincoln Alexander was also a mentor and a friend. In 2021, Senator Oliver released his autobiography, A Matter of Equality. In this extraordinary book, the senator shares the immense impact Link, as he calls him, had on his life. To mark Lincoln Alexander Day, Senator Oliver has shared some of his memories and moments in time with Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard in an honest, heartfelt, and inspiring conversation. And we've called upon a few of our talented friends to help us mark the occasion. We hope you enjoy this very special program featuring song, spoken word, and 2 incredible Canadians who continue to do the work that Lincoln Alexander set out to do as a young man in Ontario many decades ago. May you be inspired by their words and moved by their message. Enjoy.
Greetings, friends. As we mark Lincoln Alexander Day, it is an honor to come together to celebrate 2 greats in Canada's history. On this day, we celebrate the late Lincoln Alexander, who was the first Black member of Parliament in the House of Commons, the first Black federal cabinet minister, and the 24th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. We also celebrate retired Senator Donald Oliver, who was the first Black male to sit in the Senate, serving for 22 years. Senator Oliver and the Honorable Lincoln Alexander were lawyers, colleagues, friends, and social activists together, challenging the status quo. In his new book, A Matter of Equality, Senator Oliver chronicles his life of work seeking equality in Canada, calling out the inequities and discrimination embedded in our social, educational, health, political, and legal systems. Senator Oliver has been a champion not just for African Canadians, but for all Canadians. I am very pleased to join in appreciation of Senator Oliver's autobiographical work as we examine what progress has been made and as we reflect on the work that still needs to be done. Let us pray. Gracious God, who makes all things possible for us, thank you for this opportunity to celebrate the lives of 2 of your warriors in the struggle against racism. We thank you for vision and wisdom. We thank you for perseverance and hope. We thank you for strength and for courage. We thank you for the desire to make this country and this world better. We are especially grateful for what you have done in the life of your son, Donald Oliver. Thank you for all that has been accomplished through him. Help us now as we continue the work, the struggle against injustice in the world. Give us voices to speak out. Give our hearts courage and position us so that our voices may be heard. Use us to accomplish your good and perfect will. Bless our time together now. In the matchless name of Christ Jesus, we pray. Amen.
My name is Demi Olega, and this is my poem, Together We Stand. This poem is dedicated to all people of African descent. Together we stand. We are the descendants of Jamaican Maroons, Black loyalists, Black refugees, African immigrants from the diaspora, overflowing descendants of Oduduwa, like my people, with fast and flowing Yoruba, so we never forget the voice of our ancestors. On the shoulders of our ancestors, we stand, binding together as communities of African descent. This is where we've lived, learned, and listened. Every tongue counted, every story sacred. We've gone through pain, yet we speak our own food. In this land, African Nova Scotians have fought and continue to fight against inequities. We push on joyfully. We sing songs of victory in spite of racism, in spite of discrimination, in spite of anti-Black racism. But y'all should know, we don't give up easily. They tried to take us out of history, but we thrived in spite of rejection. We strive for perfection because we believe in resilience. We believe in survival, the ability to rise from the dust and emerge at the dawn of a new day. Together we stand and we are not afraid. The ancestors in Africa fought for their land with broken hearts and dirtied hands. From their sweat, blood, labor, we rose. From their agony and resilience, we learned. In their dreams and hopes, we praised. In African churches, we prayed. From the fight of our ancestors, we learned. In their resilience, we stood. In their yearning for justice, we cried. They tried to silence us. They tried to suppress us. They tried to stop us from achieving, but y'all should know, we don't give up easily. We push on joyfully, undo our chains by the power of truth-telling, by the power of activism. We sing songs of victory in spite of racism, in spite of discrimination, in spite of anti-Black racism. But y'all should know, we don't give up easily. They tried to take us out of history, but we thrive in spite of rejection. We strive for perfection because we believe in resurrection, the ability to rise from the dust and emerge at the dawn of a new day. From Halifax to North Preston to East Preston to Hammonds Plains to Weymouth Falls to Acacia to Truro and all the way to Sydney. Together we stand. We are the iron roots and the nails of this country. This country is just as much ours as it is yours, and together we stand.
Senator Oliver, thank you so much for agreeing to engage in this conversation about your work, your life's work, your book, and about Lincoln Alexander. So I'd like to start our conversation about young Don Oliver, who was mentored by Lincoln Alexander. Please tell us why your relationship with him was so important. What was most significant from his mentorship that influenced your life course as a public servant?
Well, I first met him in the 1970s. I was in West Hamilton, where he was running as a progressive conservative candidate in the general election. And I was the legal counsel for the Progressive Conservative Party, giving lectures to various campaigns all across Canada. So I met him then, and I remember that I was incredibly impressed. This tall man with his stately mustache, long basketball player's fingers, and he just stood out. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he had a sense when you talked to him, he made you very calm, very peaceful, and very happy. And as I got to know him over the years, he became a legend, an icon, just a maker of men and a grower of countries. But I think that the main thing I got from Lincoln Alexander, and had a chance to meet him and indeed work with him on some things from time to time, is that Lincoln Alexander was the most influential Black man in Canadian history. There's no Black man or woman more influential than Lincoln Alexander has been in terms of helping youth, uplifting us, promoting education, and all the other things that are so important to we people of African descent.
When I read your book and I got to the chapter that you devoted to Link, it was very moving, very, very moving to read that and to see you as a young person being mentored by this person that you held in such high esteem. So what would be the most significant thing from his mentorship that guided your life's work as an advocate, as a public servant, as a parliamentarian?
I think his approach to life and his approach to resolution of issues, and it was never by violence. It was always by quiet persuasion. It was always by something gentle, and it was always on something very gentlemanly-like, because he always remained the warm human being no matter what he did. And if I had just a few of those values, it certainly helped me in my life's work. But the main thing that Lincoln Alexander was a person who was very, very humble. You never heard Link coming first, but it's what can I do for you and help the others. And if I could digress for 1 second, when I was getting my honorary degree from Link at the University of Guelph, I was on the stage with him for almost 2 hours, and the students came by to get their diplomas, and as chancellor, he had to participate in the ceremony. And with each student who came by, he had something special to say. And he would have read before they came up to the stage, "Oh, this is Betty. Well, Betty, I see you got your degree. I hope you're going to stick with education because you've been a great student," and just encourage you. And he had something for every student. And downstairs later in the reception, you could hear students saying, "What did he say to you when you came up? What did he say to you?" And there he is. Isn't he such a nice man? So that warmth just came out, and those students will never forget it.
Yes, yes, that's wonderful. As you know, we are doing this on Lincoln Alexander Day. And one of the things that I find quite sad is that most Canadians don't know about the life and work of Lincoln Alexander, don't know the Link that you knew, that you've just described to us. So let me ask you, why should all Canadians celebrate Lincoln Alexander Day? And why is he one of Canada's best kept secrets?
Well, it shouldn't be a secret, and more Canadians should get to know him. And the best way is from the bottom up rather than the top down. In other words, we start with the students and not their grandparents. And it seems to me that we have, in February every year, a Black History Month. I think we need a Black History Year. And during the course of that year, every single student from grade 5 to 11 or 12, whatever it happens to be, should have to write at least a 500-word essay on Lincoln Alexander. The older ones should have to do a 1,000-word essay on Lincoln Alexander. So they'd have to go to the history books, do some research, dig out some of his writings, his speeches and so on, learn who this man was. And at the end, a couple of them will have to stand up in their class and read their essays. This is a way that more people and more Canadians will get a chance to learn more about Lincoln Alexander and the great man he was. I mean, the story is so powerful and so important, it has to be told.
That's wonderful. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation, that people will be able to view this conversation on Lincoln Alexander Day, maybe that will begin to open some doors to that education. I love your statement, start with the children and not the grandparents. And I think our children, our grandchildren can lead us.
Yeah.
They can lead us in this education. I absolutely agree with you. And that leads into my next question for you in terms of how do we change that? So what would you want young Black Canadians, those grandchildren, to know about Link?
Well, first of all, and this might sound negative, but it isn't, they have to know that Lincoln experienced blatant racism in his lifetime. And on knowing that, they say, well, what did he do about it when he confronted it? Well, let me give you two quick examples. He was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, Royal Canadian, and he was there doing his duty, doing his work, and his team were in Vancouver for a day, and they all went to a bar to have a drink. He ordered a drink, and the bartender would not serve him. And he asked again for a drink. He had the money, and the bartender would not serve him. We don't serve Negro people, and we don't serve people of your color. And so Lincoln went to his superior officers and complained. Superior officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and the officer said, I'm not going to do anything about that. You're a Negro person. What do you expect? And so Lincoln couldn't take more of that. He said, I will resign and see what I can do from the outside to come in. So he resigned, he got an honorable discharge, and that's how he dealt with that one. The second and most important one, I think, in his entire life is when he was in law school. The person who was in charge of the law school, the dean, actually was giving a lecture to between 200 and 250 students. And in the course of this lecture in law, the dean said, it's like looking for a nigger in the woodpile. Well, that's an old slave expression that's nasty, that's bitter, that's a very, very derogatory and hateful and painful. And when Lincoln heard it, his shoulders and this big man just began to shake. And when it was time for questions, this tall man stood up and he said, I have a question, Mr. Dean. And he said, I'd like you to explain to me what nigger in the woodpile means. And I want to know why you, a leader, are using expressions like that when you know it is hurtful and harmful. Why don't you lead and become a leader? And he didn't know if he was going to graduate from law school after that. He didn't know if they were going to kick him out, if they were going to fail him. But later, months later, he graduated and he met the dean, and the dean said, I felt that what I was saying was proper and correct, and you should never judge my academic credentials. I knew that you were going to pass. I would never have failed you for something like that because you were a good student, Lincoln. But it's just a wonderful story to let you know that he faced very difficult situations in his lifetime and stood up and did something about it.
Yes, so thank you for sharing those two stories. They're pretty powerful. And I think really good examples of that leadership, that quiet, determined leadership to question injustice. What would you say was one of the greatest life lessons you learned from Lincoln Alexander?
Humility. I mean, when you walked in places where the head of the Workers' Compensation Board was, or where the cabinet minister of labor was, or where the lieutenant governor of Canada's largest province, the province of Ontario, was, where Lincoln was the lieutenant governor, you would never see anyone but a very humble, but very forthright individual who was doing his duty for the Queen and for the country. And so I think that humility is what really, really, really stands out. And Lincoln changed many lives. He changed attitudes. He promoted tolerance, and he was a great supporter of thousands and thousands of youths whose lives have been touched by this great man. And that's a wonderful part of his contribution to Canada. Lincoln, when I would give a major speech on diversity and so on in later years, Lincoln would often send me notes written on Lincoln Alexander letterhead and send them to me. And one of them that he wrote on more than one occasion was to say, the big problem for Blacks in Canada today is the loss of job opportunities. Second, economic deprivation. And the third one he always gave was the myths and attitudes that exist by white people about people of color. He's talking about the stereotypes like they would say, well, Black people are uneducated. Well, look at you, Madam Senator, you are highly educated, and it can't be said that you are an uneducated Black person. Well, that's part of the white stereotype. And also in terms of men, that we are violent. We're Black and therefore we're violent people. Well, you know, his humility was just the antithesis of that very thing. But nonetheless, he said that is part of the stereotypes, the myths and the attitudes that white people had, and we had to find a way to blot them out or to change them.
Yes, and I can see that you stand on his shoulders and I stand on yours. Which it's wonderful. What was one of the greatest political lessons that you learned from Lincoln Alexander?
Well, I'll tell you, he learned what the grassroots means to electoral success. He was practicing with a firm that had Polish people as clients. And Link got to know the Polish community in Hamilton extremely well, and they became very strong supporters. So also with some Italian people in the communities. So with each of these various ethnic European communities, Lincoln, a Black man, got to know them, and they got to know and like him. And so when it came time for the election, they said, we like that guy, and we know he's a hard worker. Let's vote for him for change for our riding. So he knew how to really use constituents and constituency associations and constituency people in it from his own party that would help him have success. And that worked. And I learned the same thing in the background work that I did in politics. We were both lawyers. We both did public service in government and politics, and we both gave back to the community. So those are the things that I learned, and from the little notes and calls that I would receive from him along the way, it kept me encouraged.
That's so important, that whole point of having someone that keeps you encouraged, because the fight for equality, the fight for rights can be quite challenging, and even in federal politics. So if there was one thing that you feel really helped you prepare for that life, what would you say it was?
Well, I think having a legal training, because legal training is so very, very different from anything you learn in undergrad school, because it's very, very disciplined. And one of the main things that makes you do is to go to the issue. You could have 5 or 6 different facts in a certain happening. And the classic case is there's 2 cars collide. And then you say to people, what did you see? And there should be one essential thing. And lawyers are taught to go to the issue, the determining issue, and deal with that and make their arguments around that, and to develop that. And that kind of training helped us well in public service. And it helped Link well in the Workers' Compensation Board and certainly helped him in doing the Queen's duty as the Lieutenant Governor of the province of Ontario. So legal training.
Yes, yes, that's really helpful.
I said I wasn't gonna tell nobody, but I couldn't keep it to myself. Oh, I couldn't keep it to myself. Oh, I couldn't keep it to myself. Said I wasn't gonna tell nobody, but I couldn't keep it to myself. What the Lord has done for me. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When he saved my soul. Saved my soul. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When he wrote my name on the road. Then I started walking. I started talking. I started singing. I started shouting. Yes, I. What the Lord has done for me. Said I wasn't gonna testify, but I couldn't keep it to myself. Oh, I couldn't keep it to myself. Oh, I couldn't keep it to myself. Said I wasn't gonna testify, but I couldn't keep it to myself. What the Lord has done for me. You ought to be there. You ought to be there. When he saved my soul. Saved my soul. You ought to be there. You ought to be there. When he wrote my name on the road. Then I started walking. Then I started talking. Then I started singing. Then I started look what the Lord has done for me. I said I wasn't gonna shout no more, but I couldn't keep it to myself. Oh, I couldn't keep it to myself. Said I couldn't keep it to myself. Said I wasn't gonna shout no more, but I couldn't keep it to myself. What the Lord has done for me. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When he saved my soul. Saved my soul. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When he wrote my name on the road. Then I started walking. Then I started talking. Then I started singing. Then I started look what the Lord has done for me. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When you saved my soul. Saved my soul. You ought to been there. You ought to been there. When he wrote my name on the road. Then I started walking. Then I started talking. Then I started singing. Then I started look what the Lord has done for me. Whoa, then I started walking. Then I started talking. Then I started singing. Then I started shouting. Look what the Lord has done for me.
I want to switch now to some questions from community members. Because we were not able to have an opportunity for people to join in live with questions, I put out a request to some community members that I knew had read your book. And I'm really pleased to say that several people followed through and submitted questions. So I want to go to some of those now. And we'll start with the Reverend Dr. Wanda Britton. And she asks, what do you see as the #1 priority of government in our ongoing fight for social justice and equity?
For me, the #1 thing is that governments, provincial and federal, have to put teeth behind the express promises they have made to the African Canadian community that things are going to happen and make them happen. Too many promises have been given that are sitting there vacant, void, with absolutely nothing having happened with them. And so we have to ask governments, particularly the federal government, to put some teeth into the action. After all, this is the decade of Canadians of African descent. Let's do something before the decade runs out to show that Canada can take a lead in doing things to equalize the opportunity for people of African descent.
So that need for greater leadership and action. Thank you.
Action in particular.
Yes, yes. The next questions come from our premier, Tim Houston. You told me that he had a copy of the book, so I reached out to him to see if he'd like to ask a question. He sent in several. I'm going to ask you a couple of his questions. First, what strategies did you find worked in the Senate to unite individuals of differing political perspectives?
Good question. In the Senate, it's very, very different from a House of Assembly in a provincial legislature, because in the Senate, we are appointed. And so that means that it's no longer representation by population. And because we are appointed, the way that things happen can be very, very different. And under the Constitution of Canada, senators are supposed to protect their region, protect minorities and so on, and work together on a number of essential, vital things. So when I would have an issue such as stalking that I wanted to do work with, I would just go over to the other side of the House, sit down and talk with like-minded senators and say, here's something I'm going to pursue. Here are the reasons I'm going to pursue it. Do you think you could stand up and support me on this? And that kind of approach often worked. But the general answer to the question is, just as President Joe Biden is so famous for, and we can't do it now because of the pandemic, but when you have an issue that you want the other side or political opponents to get on side with you for, the best thing to do is to have a one-on-one, face-to-face personal meeting where you can look in their eyes, give your point of view, watch their eyes expression, have a cup of coffee together or a glass of water together, as I now do, and just sit down as friends and talk about these important issues of public policy that affect the public at large.
Senator, you've actually answered his second question, which was really about how do you bring them on board? So thank you for sharing those strategies that you clearly found very effective in your work in the Senate. The next question comes from Candace Thomas. And she starts off with a little preamble. She says, Senator Oliver, congratulations and thank you for this vividly beautiful and honest book. It is a gift to all who will experience it. At page 208, you wrote, and I quote, "But I'm still walking in the late evening of life. Now it's the only thing on my bucket list. Just give me some quiet bliss so I can see, appreciate, and enjoy all the beauty of nature around me." Now her question: you have lived and continue to live a purpose-filled life. What of all your professional accomplishments are you most proud and why? And do you think your parents would share your view if they had lived to see all you would contribute to the fabric of Canada?
Wow. Thank you, Candace, for that wonderful question. I think about my mother and father a lot. They've been dead for a long time, but they're in my mind, my heart, all the time. And my mother and father did their best in their own way to break down barriers, as their mother and father did before them. And so my great-great-grandparents, and I'm fifth generation Canadian, had a vision for education for their children and for breaking down barriers so other Black African people following them could have an easier door to open. And I think that the main thing that I would like to do is to think that I followed in my family's traditions on my mother's side and on my father's side in helping to make life better for those coming after us by breaking down some of those systemic barriers wherever I could. And in my case, it was promoting the business case for diversity.
That's pretty incredible. And so even in this moment when you've been asked to speak about your professional accomplishments, you focus in on what you've been able to do to help others. We thank you for that.
Thank you.
For me, way back on Calvary, the blood gives me strength from day to day. It will never lose its power. Well, it soothes my doubts, and it calms all my fears. That same blood, it erases all of my tears. Oh, the blood that gives me strength from day to day. It will never lose its power. It reaches to the highest mountain, yeah, and it flows to the lowest valley, yeah. The blood that gives me my strength from day to day, it will never lose its power. It reaches to the highest mountain, and it flows to the lowest valley. That gives my strength from day to day. It will never lose power. It will never lose its power. It will never lose its mighty power.
The next question comes from Michelle Williams. And she asks, in the face of all those moments of anti-Black racism, in the pool room, the boardroom, and beyond, what drove you to respond in such a proactive, positive way? What lessons and internal messages were you drawing upon?
I think that I was troubled by the stereotypes of Black people that I knew to be untrue. And I wanted to find ways that I could personally make a difference in changing some of those stereotypes. Now, people like Stokely Carmichael in his book on Black Power and many of the other writings, he was a brilliant writer, should have been a professor, that he did. He talked about those stereotypes in detail. And we've talked about a couple of already. That is, Black people were uneducated and could not get an education and could not understand the things that only white people could understand. And that Black people were violent, and that Black people were oversexed, that Black people were lazy, that Black people could not be trusted, and so on. All of these stereotypes. And I said, look, I want to set about to try to do something about them, the ones that I can. So with education in my family, we all studied hard and tried to do well and tried to make a difference. And so my sisters, Jeannie, Shirley, Nancy, my brother, David, all did in fact make a difference. And then I have nephews like Dr. Les Oliver, who is a PhD and who's used to win awards for being an excellent teacher. Here, a Black man with a PhD being a teacher, that helps to break down these stereotypes. And so that was very, very important. And so, Michelle, I think it's a great question. And that's my response to it.
Leading by example.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle has a second question. What advice would you give young African Nova Scotians and other Black Canadians trying to eradicate anti-Black racism today?
Well, I think you should go back to Lincoln Alexander Day and look at why there is a Lincoln Alexander Day, and there is a day because of the exemplary example that he set as a Black man in Canada. And as I said to you earlier, in my opinion, he's the most influential Black man in all of Canadian history. So you go back and you look at those things, and he said, look, do something about loss of opportunities, and do something about economic deprivation, and finally do something about changing those myths and those stereotypes and those attitudes that are wrong about Black people. If you could just correct a wrong and say, well, Black people are not unintelligent, and Black people can learn, or Black people are great musicians, or Black people are great athlete elites, and so on. So we can do great things at the very height of the game. If those attitudes can be changed, that will help level the playing field for all and make Canada more equal.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And really sort of, it's almost as though you're talking two paths. So one path is for young Black Canadians to do what they can do in terms of achieving education and moving forward and breaking the stereotypes. But a lot of your work has also focused on breaking the systemic barriers. Mm-hmm. and pushing through those systemic barriers. The next question actually comes from a young woman who happens to be my daughter, Candace Roker. And she asked, she saw me reading the book, and then she asked if she could read it. So she's read it. So I wanted you to know that your book is spanning generations as well. So here's her question. How did you deal with issues of white privilege as a member of the Conservative Party and while working for a major law firm?
Well, white privilege is an extremely difficult thing. Link Alexander experienced it and dealt with it. And I experienced it and dealt with it frequently. And for people who may not be used to the expression, white privilege means that when you have a level playing field and there's a job, say, and there's a white person and a Black person, and the white person and the Black person have the same educational qualifications, the same work experience, the same promotions, the same everything else, and the job goes to the white person over the Black person, that's white privilege, because it's just a little perk that white people have, and they have it by virtue of the color of their skin. Their skin is white, and they were born with it. And all things in society are judged by white and whiteness. So white privilege, it's not a nasty, bad word. It just means that that perk is there and they have it. And so it's a question of getting whites to go back and look at it and see, oh my goodness, we were both equal. There's no reason I should have gotten that job over the Black person. So let's go back and look at that again. So it was not easy, and it's not something that could happen quickly. One of the things I learned from Lincoln Alexander is don't come in with a stick when a carrot or some honey will work better. Take the soft, easy, perhaps slower way, but be like a tortoise, slow and steady wins the race. And that's what you have to do with white privilege. You have to know what object you want to achieve. Now, in business, my approach was we need more Black people in positions of authority. And in a large corporation, a position of authority, if it's not the CEO, it's on the board and the chairman of the board or on the executive committee of a board. That's where you need Black influence. And that's where you need diversity. And so that's where I was working hard for decades, trying to get more Black people in senior positions, both in the public and the private sector, on boards, on commissions, and things like that. In a law firm, it's different because you have to know your place and you have to deal with what you have, and it takes a longer time to affect any change. But maybe I should write a second book.
I think there's a lot more that you have to tell us and teach us. This next question, I think, is a nice follow-up to that. It's from Lisa Doucette, who's the superintendent of APSE, the Atlantic Province's Special Education Authority. And they are using your book as a teaching tool for their staff in their work to address anti-Black racism. And she says, it is a book that is difficult to put down. I wonder what advice Senator Oliver might have for individuals in a position of power in using their privilege and power to lead systemic change in anti-Black racism as part of an organization and beyond, and truly becoming authentic allies.
Very good question. In the book, I talk about the president of the Royal Bank of Canada, one of the largest corporations in Canada, with 80 to 90,000 employees. It's huge. And in the book, I quote him directly where he said, after learning personal stories of their Black employees and their wives and their children and what they encounter in terms of blatant racism on almost a daily basis, he threw up his hands and he said, we have never been told this. We have never been sensitized to this. This is wrong, and it's got to change. So if someone like the president of the Royal Bank of Canada, the president of the Bank of Montreal, the president of BCE, and the other largest companies we had in Canada said, let's take this book and make it compulsory reading for every one of our senior people. And after they've read it, have them send me a one-page note, that is the CEO of the company, a one-page note saying what steps they're going to take to affect positive change to equalize the opportunity for all people. Because as I say in the book, it's a matter of equality.
It's a matter of equality. So really good advice for those who are in leadership positions to use their power and their privilege to affect the kind of change that we need if we're going to achieve that equality that we all seek.
The world we're living in has changed so
Anything can happen, all we gotta do is act right. Put the guns down, throw away the past life. Change the world, we just gotta learn to make and keep it motivated. Trust it ain't easy. Cause ain't we trying to live freely? Share hugs and the love, but we greedy. Cause when the dark stay dark, we be searching for the light, claiming we can't see like Stevie. So if we gonna change, we gon' need a jump start. That will be in time, but for now, this is one part. We all we got, you gon' need to see. Cause all we really need is LOVE. Let's go. We can change this world.
As we wrap up, Senator Oliver, I want to take us back, talk about the murder of Mr. George Floyd by police in 2020 that set off a global movement to bring attention to anti-Black racism and Black Lives Matter. One of the important initiatives that emerged here in Canada was West Hall's Black North Initiative. Can you share some of your thoughts on how you think the Black Lives Matter movement, the Black North Initiative, how might those movements influence public policy?
I think that one follows the other. Black Lives Matter was there, but hovering, and the police were being very violent, even for civil marches to protest. But then with the Floyd 9-minute murder that was watched in real time by millions around the globe, it snapped the bone and made people wake up and say, hey, this is not right. This has got to stop. We have to do something about it. And so the world rallied around it. And then in Canada, West Hall started the Black North Initiative. And the initiative basically asks corporations and bureaucrats in the provinces and territories to sign a pledge and saying they're going to do something about it. That is to put pen to pencil. Now, there are several important parts to the pledge. There's a part that deals with youth, and there's a part that deals with business that we have been discussing already. And that is, he said, it's because there are 3.5 million Blacks in Canada today. Let's say that in the next 5 years, 3.5% of your hires are of people of African descent, and 3.5% of the hires on the board of directors are people of African descent, and people in your executive ranks and new hires are people. Then if they do that and they fulfill their pledge, that is going to make a systemic major change in breaking down white privilege, in breaking down racism, and equalizing the opportunity for all in Canadian society. And so I think I'm on the board of directors of the Black North Initiative. I strongly believe in that organization and the work it's doing. It's doing wonderful work in breaking down these barriers. And I just wish that more Canadians would jump on board and give their support, because this has a chance of being a real life changer for so many people.
Thank you, Senator Oliver. And we will continue to follow the work of the Black North Initiative and many other initiatives that are in place now to address anti-Black racism. My final question. Earlier, I asked you, what would you want young Black Canadians to know, to remember about Lincoln Alexander? I want to ask you now to share, what would you want young Black Canadians to know, to remember about Senator Don Oliver?
Oh my, well, that I was born of very humble means and of God-fearing parents who loved the Lord, who loved life and wanted to make life better for Canadians. And I just tried to do my part in fulfilling their vision and their dreams. And it was aided by the mentorship that I had directly and indirectly with Lincoln Alexander, I being in Nova Scotia, he in Ontario and other places. It was not a daily relationship or anything like that at all. But he was the example of service and determination, humility that I liked. And he remains an icon, a legend, a catalyst, someone who's broken down barriers. And I conclude by repeating that, in my opinion, Lincoln Alexander was the most influential Black man in all Canadian history. And more Canadians and more of our youth should learn about this great icon and this great hero and this great legend.
I think that this year, 2022, as we celebrate Lincoln Alexander Day, because of the gift of your book and the gift of this conversation, more Canadians will certainly know about Lincoln Alexander. And it is my wish that more will want to learn more about him because of the conversation and the high esteem in which you hold him, and the significant influence that he's had on your life that has helped to bring us to where we are and contribute so much to all that you have given to this great country. I thank you for this.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Lincoln Alexander once said, "It is not our duty to be average. It is our duty to set a higher example for others to follow." The example Lincoln Alexander set is amplified through the work of amazing individuals like Senator Don Oliver and Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, and that work is not done. Thank you for taking the time to join us to mark Lincoln Alexander Day. We hope our program has inspired you to be the change in your own communities. We hope the life and legacy of Lincoln Alexander reminds us all to stand up, speak out, and right the wrongs of racial injustice and inequality. Happy Lincoln Alexander Day.